August 19th, 1944. Deep inside the forests of East Prussia, the high command of the Wehrmacht sat in tense silence. Maps were spread across a massive oak table under the dim glow of lamps. Cigarette smoke drifted through the air like a battlefield haze. General Oberst Alfred Jodl leaned over a report, his finger tracing a red line stretching from the Normandy beaches to the heart of France. He muttered quietly to his staff, 400 miles. The Americans have reached their limit. To the German command, the mathematics seemed irrefutable. Patton's Third Army had advanced faster than any mechanized force in modern history, but that speed came at a cost. Every tank, truck, and jeep burned fuel at a terrifying rate. Logistics, not bullets, were what truly sustained an army. And according to every calculation the Wehrmacht could make, the Americans were about to run dry. From Hitler's Wolfschanze headquarters, Jodl and his aides plotted their counter-strategy. If Patton halted even for a few days, the German army could stabilize the line along the Seine, reinforce their divisions, and perhaps hold until winter. Germany had faced this problem themselves countless times. In Russia, the Blitzkrieg had died not because of Soviet resistance, but because supply trucks had failed to keep up. Fuel froze, engines failed, horses collapsed. The lesson was clear. No army could maintain such a tempo indefinitely. And yet, unknown to Jodl far to the west, a different kind of army was already on the move. An army of truck drivers. 5,958 vehicles rolled eastward through the night, their headlights blazing like a river of light cutting through the French countryside. Inside those trucks were the lifeblood of Patton's army, 12,500 tons of fuel, food, and ammunition every single day. They called it the Red Ball Express, a logistical operation so bold that no German strategist had ever dreamed it could exist. For generations, warfare had been defined by movement and attrition, by front lines and formations. The Germans had perfected the art of rapid mechanized warfare, the Blitzkrieg, but now they were about to witness something they could not match, logistics on a scale that defied military logic. The American war machine had turned transportation into a weapon. Within 72 hours, Patton's tanks, supposedly immobilized by fuel shortages, smashed through German defenses along the Seine. Within a week, Paris was liberated, and within a month, American troops stood on the threshold of the Reich itself. The great military minds of Germany were forced to confront an uncomfortable truth. Industrial power and logistical mastery had become the new measure of victory. Behind this miracle of movement were 23,000 truck drivers, 75% of them African-American soldiers serving in segregated units. They were young men from Alabama, Detroit, Chicago, and Louisiana, many of whom had never driven outside their own towns before the war. Now, they were operating under relentless pressure, driving 20 hours a day, often under enemy fire, through bombed-out villages and cratered roads. Their task was simple in theory, but nearly impossible in execution. Deliver supplies faster than Patton could burn them. The concept of the Red Ball Express was born out of desperation. On August 25th, 1944, in a requisitioned French chateau near Le Mans, Lieutenant Colonel Laurent Ayres gathered a group of skeptical officers and engineers. He laid out a new kind of supply system. There will be one highway, he declared, running from the beaches at Cherbourg straight to the front. Trucks will move forward on one route, return on another. No stops, no delays. 20 hours of operation a day, headlights on at all times. If a truck breaks down, we push it off the road and keep going. The officers exchanged doubtful glances. It violated every rule of wartime logistics. Convoys were supposed to maintain radio silence, travel in darkness, and operate under strict control. But Ayres didn't have the luxury of rules, only a desperate need for speed. The plan was approved that same night. Within 36 hours, the impossible became real. The Red Ball Express was born. From the moment the first convoys rolled out, it was chaos and brilliance in motion. Thousands of trucks thundered down narrow French roads in endless columns, dust clouds trailing behind them. Each truck carried 2.5 tons of precious cargo, fuel drums, rations, ammunition, spare parts, and even entire aircraft engines. Military police patrolled the routes constantly. If a truck slowed below 25 miles per hour, it was ordered off the road. If a driver stopped without authorization, he risked court-martial. The system functioned like a living organism. Maintenance units were stationed every 50 miles, ready to repair engines or tow broken vehicles out of the way. Drivers slept in their trucks, ate cold rations, and rotated in shifts. So the line never stopped. It was a 700-mile loop of relentless motion, a steel artery, pumping lifeblood into the heart of the Allied advance. German reconnaissance. Aircraft reported the phenomenon with disbelief. Columns of American trucks moved night and day, headlights blazing in full defiance of blackout orders. The Luftwaffe pilots couldn't understand it. Why would the Americans make themselves such easy targets? What they didn't realize was that air superiority had changed the rules. The US and British Air Forces had driven the Luftwaffe from the skies over France. The Red Ball Express could afford to run openly, brazenly, without fear. For the first time in modern warfare, logistics itself became unstoppable. The Germans tried to adapt. Field Marshal von Rundstedt ordered air and artillery strikes on the highways. Saboteurs targeted bridges and fuel depots. But it was like trying to dam a flood with bare hands. Even when routes were destroyed, the Red Ball convoys simply carved new ones. Bridges were rebuilt overnight by combat engineers. Drivers used back roads, farmland, even railroad beds to keep moving. Patton, meanwhile, understood exactly what he'd been given. "My men can eat their belts," he said, "but my tanks need gas." And gas they had, because the Red Ball Express kept it flowing. But for the men behind the wheel, the work was brutal. Sleep was a luxury. Food was scarce. Accidents were common. Drivers often pushed themselves until exhaustion blurred the road into darkness. Many died not from enemy fire, but from fatigue and treacherous roads. Private William Red Johnson, one of the countless African-American drivers, later wrote, "We weren't heroes in the papers. Nobody saw us fight. But without those trucks, Patton's tanks would have stopped dead. We knew it. That's what kept us going." The Red Ball Express was more than a supply route. It was a symbol of determination, courage, and sheer industrial willpower. As the Allied armies surged toward the German border, the system expanded to meet new demands. Temporary depots were built every 50 miles. Fuel was stored in makeshift drums, ammunition in open fields. Mechanics worked under floodlights through the night, welding axles, changing tires, replacing engines. By September, the Express was moving more than 12,000 tons per day. By early October, that number peaked at 14,000. Every single gallon of fuel, every shell, every ration consumed on the front line had once rattled down those French roads in the back of a deuce-and-a-half truck. The impact was staggering. What the Germans had calculated as impossible became the defining triumph of Allied logistics. Yet, as the months wore on, the pressure grew unbearable. The roads were never meant for such relentless traffic. Mud, rain, and constant weight tore them apart. Trucks sank into ruts, bridges collapsed, and tires shredded faster than replacements could arrive. By November, the weather turned cold. Convoys moved through snow and sleet. Frostbite and pneumonia became common. Drivers wrapped themselves in blankets, hands numb on the steering wheel, eyes stinging from exhaustion. Still, they drove on because stopping was not an option. At its height, the Red Ball Express consumed more than 300,000 gallons of gasoline every day just to deliver fuel to the front. It was a self-sustaining paradox, burning fuel to deliver fuel, spending resources to move resources, but it worked. By December 1944, the German army, starved of fuel and supplies, launched its final desperate counterattack in the Ardennes. The Battle of the Bulge began with a roar. Snow blanketed Europe as panzers rolled west. Once again, Allied logistics faced its ultimate test. During those critical weeks, the Red Ball Express shifted from offense to survival. Convoys were rerouted, bridges repaired under fire, and fuel deliveries prioritized for the freezing frontline troops. Many drivers found themselves under direct attack as German paratroopers and commandos infiltrated the supply lines. Yet the system held. Even as German forces advanced, the express continued to operate, keeping the lifeline open until reinforcements could turn the tide. When the smoke cleared, the Allies had won. The German offensive collapsed, not only from fierce resistance, but from lack of supplies. Once again, logistics had decided the outcome of battle. When the Red Ball Express was finally deactivated in November 1944, it had delivered more than 400,000 tons of fuel, ammunition, and supplies. It had kept an entire army alive, moving and victorious. But perhaps its greatest legacy lay not in numbers, but in people. The African-American drivers who manned the trucks proved beyond doubt their courage, endurance, and indispensable skill. Though they faced segregation, prejudice, and invisibility within their own army, their contribution was undeniable. They were the beating heart of an operation that helped liberate Europe. In later years, military historians would look back at the Red Ball Express as the turning point of modern warfare, the moment when industrial logistics became as vital as battlefield tactics. German officers who survived the war admitted as much. General Siegfried Westphal later wrote, "The Americans did not defeat us solely through numbers or weapons. They defeated us through motion, through a machine that never stopped. The lessons of that machine would shape future wars, from Korea to Vietnam and beyond. Every modern military supply chain, every rapid deployment force, owes its existence to the principles forged on those dusty French roads in 1944. Today, few of the original drivers remain. Their names rarely appear in history books, overshadowed by generals and battles. But every tank that rolled through France, every liberated town, and every soldier fed and fueled on the front lines owed their survival to those unseen convoys. The Red Ball Express was not just a feat of engineering, it was an act of defiance. Against terrain, fatigue, and even prejudice, it proved that the strength of an army lies not only in its firepower, but in its will to keep moving forward. As one veteran later said, "We weren't just delivering supplies, we were delivering victory." When the war finally ended in 1945, the engines of the Red Ball Express fell silent. The convoys that had once thundered across France like steel rivers now sat idle in muddy depots, their tires worn, their paint scarred by dust and time. For the men who drove them, the silence felt heavier than the roar of any battlefield. After months of constant motion, of sleepless nights and endless highways, the sudden stillness was almost unbearable. The war had been won, but for those who lived it, something deeper had changed forever. Many of the drivers returned home to a country that barely knew their names. The newspapers hailed the victories of generals, but rarely mentioned the convoys that made those victories possible. For the African-American soldiers who made up most of the Red Ball Express, the return was bittersweet. They had helped free Europe, but back home, many still faced segregation, discrimination, and silence. Yet even in the face of injustice, they carried something unbreakable with them: pride. They had done what the world said was impossible. They had kept an army alive. Private Henry Dalton, a driver from Georgia, later wrote in his diary, "They said we couldn't handle machines, that we couldn't think like engineers. But we built the greatest machine the world ever saw, a machine of motion. And we never stopped." For many veterans of the Express, that pride became a quiet legacy that shaped the post-war generation. Some became truckers, mechanics, engineers, and business owners. Others joined the civil rights movement, channeling the same discipline and unity they had learned on the French roads into the long struggle for equality. The Red Ball Express, in its own way, had taught them all something that went far beyond war. It had taught them that movement, forward motion, was life itself. In the years that followed, historians began to understand the scale of what had been accomplished. The Red Ball Express had delivered nearly 500,000 tons of supplies in just 81 days. It had kept an army of 250,000 men moving faster than any military force in history. It had rewritten the rules of logistics. Forever, the lessons learned in those convoys became the foundation of modern military supply systems, from the U.S. Army's armored divisions in the Cold War to the rapid deployment units of the 21st century. The principles of continuous flow, parallel routes, and mobile maintenance, born on the roads of France, became permanent doctrines of global warfare. But there was something even more enduring than the strategy, the human story behind it. The Red Ball Express had shown that war, for all its destruction, could also reveal humanity at its strongest. The courage to endure, the will to work, the refusal to let the line break even for a second. Decades later, French villagers still remembered the roaring trucks. In the small towns along the route, Chartres, Le Mans, Reims, old men and women recalled how the Americans had come, headlights blazing, engines howling through the night, carrying freedom in their wake. Children would run out to wave at the drivers, tossing them apples or chocolate, and the soldiers would wave back, grinning through the dust. In their own way, they became the ghosts of liberation, faceless heroes passing by in convoys that never stopped. Even today, pieces of that history remain. Some of the original roads still exist, faint traces of tire tracks visible in the countryside. In museums, the olive-drab GMC deuce-and-a-half trucks stand as silent witnesses, relics of an age when the world was held together by wheels and courage. In 1994, 50 years after the operation, surviving veterans gathered in France to commemorate the Red Ball Express. Grey-haired men, many walking with canes, stood beside restored trucks painted with the familiar red circle logo. One veteran placed his hand on the hood and whispered, "We drove this thing to win a war. But what we really drove was history. For them, it wasn't just a machine. It was a memory of youth, of purpose, of a moment when the impossible became real." At that ceremony, a French mayor told the crowd, "We speak often of soldiers and battles, but we forget the ones who made the soldiers move. Without the Red Ball, there would have been no freedom. Merci." Tears filled the eyes of the men who had once been boys behind those steering wheels. For 50 years, few had thanked them. But now, standing once again on the soil they helped liberate, they understood that history had finally remembered. Today, the legacy of the Red Ball Express is not measured in miles or tons, but in spirit. It is the spirit of relentless motion, the belief that when everything seems impossible, you move anyway, from war to peace, from prejudice to progress. The lesson remains the same. Keep the wheels turning, because movement, in every form, is freedom. The Red Ball Express was more than a supply line. It was a promise that courage and unity could outpace fear and tyranny, that ordinary men could do extraordinary things when history demanded it. It was and remains the road that never ended. When the guns of Europe fell silent in May 1945, the world breathed a broken sigh of relief. Cities lay in ruins. Roads were nothing more than scars cut into the soil, and nations stumbled to their feet, dazed by the cost of their own survival. Yet amid the wreckage of war, something remained, the network of movement, the veins of steel and asphalt that had carried the impossible forward. For many, the Red Ball Express had been a temporary miracle. But for history, it became a prophecy, the aftermath, the drivers of the Red Ball Express, the thousands of men who had raced across France under the glare of headlights and enemy fire, returned home to a country that barely knew their names. Many were young African-American soldiers who had never been allowed to fight on the front lines. They had carried the war on their backs and wheels, and yet their victory medals were quiet things, handed without fanfare. Private Henry Red Mason remembered standing on the docks of New York, watching the skyline rise through the mist as the ship approached. "They told us the war was over," he said later in an interview, But for a lot of us, the war never really ended. We came back to a different kind of battle, one without guns, but with walls you couldn't see. Segregation was still law. Opportunities were scarce. Yet the discipline, unity, and sheer logistical brilliance these men had demonstrated in Europe began to ripple through American society. Many of them would go on to become truckers, mechanics, engineers, and community leaders. The open road, once a battlefield, became a symbol of freedom. The road becomes a system. After the war, the lessons of the Red Ball Express didn't vanish. They evolved. Military planners realized that the ability to move faster, farther with precision was as vital as the ability to shoot. The U.S. Army's Transportation Corps rewrote its manuals, embedding the Red Ball model into its doctrine. One-way highways, rotating maintenance units, and mobile refueling depots became standard practice. Civilian America was watching too. In 1956, President Dwight D. Eisenhower signed the Federal Aid Highway Act, creating the Interstate Highway System, the largest infrastructure project in human history. Few remembered that Eisenhower himself had seen the chaos of supply in Europe, and before that, in 1919, had participated in the first transcontinental motor convoy. He had witnessed how roads determined destiny. In a sense, every interstate that cuts across America today, from I-95 to I-10, is a descendant of the Red Ball Express. The philosophy of constant motion, the belief that a nation's strength lies in its ability to connect its people and resources, was born not in peacetime prosperity, but in the desperate nights of 1944, when trucks roared through darkness carrying the lifeblood of an army, the forgotten hero's history. However, has a cruel habit of fading the faces of those who carried it. For decades, the Red Ball Express was a footnote in textbooks, a paragraph, a few black and white photos of trucks in the mud. The drivers' names rarely appeared. It wasn't until the 1980s that historians began to unearth the scale of what they had achieved. More than 23,000 men and women had operated the convoys, 75% of them African American. They drove nearly 6 million miles in just 81 days, delivering over 400,000 tons of supplies to the front lines. They did so with minimal rest, through rain, mud, snipers, and collapsing bridges, losing trucks and sometimes their lives. Along the way, in one forgotten dispatch, a German officer wrote, "We cannot understand how the Americans keep coming. We destroy their railroads, bomb their roads, yet the flow does not stop. It is as if their trucks breed from the earth itself." What the Germans did not understand was that the Red Ball Express wasn't just a convoy. It was an idea, an audacious, relentless declaration that no obstacle would halt the forward motion of freedom. From war to industry, in the post-war years, the men who once drove through Normandy mud now drove across the American heartland. They formed the backbone of the new trucking industry, which exploded in the 1950s as highways stretched coast to coast. Companies like Freightliner and Mack built their fleets on lessons learned from military logistics. The very phrase supply chain, so common today, was born from those wartime convoys. It wasn't just about trucks or fuel. It was about the synchronization of movement. The Red Ball Express taught the world that organization could be as powerful as firepower. And beyond industry, something quieter began to shift. Many of the African-American veterans of the Red Ball joined the early civil rights movement. They had seen what unity could accomplish when every man, regardless of rank or color, shared the same mission. The road that had carried ammunition now carried conviction. The European memory in France, remnants of the Red Ball route still linger, faint markings on forgotten signposts, rusted bridges once patched with American steel, and stories passed down in small villages where the convoys rumbled through night after night. In the town of Chartres, an old farmer named Etienne Moreau once told his grandson, "Every evening the road glowed red with their lights. They came like a river that never ended. We knew then the Germans were finished." To the French, the Red Ball Express became a symbol of liberation, not because of battles fought, but because of the endless hum of engines that meant hope was coming closer. Legacy in motion modern. Military logistics, from Iraq to Ukraine, still traces its lineage back to those chaotic months of 1944, the concept of just-in-time delivery, forward refueling bases and modular supply systems all have roots in the Red Ball Express. The Pentagon's digital logistics networks still bear echoes of that analog miracle. And yet, at its heart, the Red Ball Express was never about computers or technology. It was about people, drivers who refused to stop, mechanics who worked by lantern light, officers who gambled everything on the belief that motion itself could win a war. In 1992, a small group of surviving drivers gathered at the Transportation Museum at Fort Eustis, Virginia. They were old men now, gray hair, slow steps, but when they saw a restored deuce-and-a-half truck gleaming in the sun, they fell silent. One man placed his hand on the hood and whispered, "She never let us down. The road without end today." The Red Ball Express is more than history. It is metaphor. It reminds us that progress depends on movement, that freedom must always be fueled, maintained, and driven forward. Every generation inherits the same task, to keep the convoy moving, even when the road is dark. As the world faces new wars, new crises, and new divides, the spirit of those drivers, their endurance, their discipline, their unbreakable rhythm still matters. Because the greatest victories aren't won by those who rush the fastest, but by those who refuse to stop. In one archived diary, found decades later in a trunk in Alabama, a driver named Clarence Johnson had scribbled a final line before shipping home in 1945. "We just keep driving." Maybe that's what freedom really is, and to keep going, no matter what's in front of you. The Red Ball Express, the road that didn't just win a war, but taught the world how to move beyond it. As the engines of war fell silent and Europe began to rebuild, the story of the Red Ball Express faded into the shadows of history. But its legacy never disappeared. It lived on in every military convoy, every highway system, every lesson learned about what true power means, not destruction, but movement, coordination, and will. Those 23,000 drivers, many forgotten, many never celebrated, changed the course of the war not with rifles, but with steering wheels and grit. They proved that victory is built not only on courage, but on the tireless work of those who keep the lifelines running when the world is on fire. So the next time you see a line of trucks rolling down a highway, remember this. In 1944, it wasn't just cargo they carried. It was hope, fuel, and the momentum of freedom itself. The Red Ball Express, the road that won the war. If you found this story inspiring, hit like, subscribe for more Untold history, and share this video, because some roads should never be forgotten.